welcome back. Welcome back and good afternoon here at the Energy Security Hub, powered by the BMW Foundation Herbert Quandt. As I mentioned it earlier, I promised you an energetic program and a program full of energy, and I hope we met your expectations so far already. This is again only the beginning. We have another day coming up, but what keeps us busy is of course the topic of artificial intelligence and about powering the future, and that's where we are now into our next topic, how to secure Europe's energy supply in the age of geopolitical tensions, but also in the age of artificial intelligence. And maybe you will join me in saying artificial intelligence is no longer just a digital story. It's really becoming an energy story. Because across Europe, we can see the rapid expansion of data centers, the rapid expansion of AI infrastructure, which is, of course, driving us into a new wave of electricity demand at a time when our power systems are already under pressure. So do we have the capacity to have more? So at the same time, artificial intelligence offers enormous opportunities, as we all know from different industries, and also, of course, opportunities for the energy sector itself. And maybe you've read the question outside, AI for energy or energy for AI? What does it mean? We will tackle that in a second. And with that, I welcome you all to the power of the future again, how to deal it strategically, but also securely. And for the start, and of course for some food for thoughts at the beginning, I have the head of Central Europe here on stage, leading also the Boston Consulting Group business in Austria, Czech Republic, Germany, Hungary, Poland, and Switzerland. Please give him a warm welcome, Michael Brigl.
Thanks a lot. Good up. It's always good to have good music. Very good to see you. Thanks a lot for having me. Thanks a lot for the invitation. Before we kick off discussing the topic on AI and energy, I wanted to give us a bit of a fact base, how we look at the whole AI dynamics and the energy dynamics. But before we go into the interrelation between the two, what I think is absolutely crucial, we need to talk first about where do we stand with our technologies, where do we stand with our high-tech agenda in Europe and in Germany. Sometimes we start talking too quickly about second and third order effects, but let's talk first about our high-tech agendas and where do we stand. Our track record is not sufficient. 10, 15 years ago, for the Germans in the room, of course, we were still the world champion in exports. But when it came to the next technological wave, particularly on the digital technologies, we lost out. And now we come to the third wave of the digital technologies, which are powered obviously by AI, by quantum, by life sciences breakthroughs. And this is where we're actually not competitive, and this is where we truly need a step up. There will be tomorrow and this weekend a lot of discussions on the high-tech agenda of Germany and of Europe. And I think before, obviously, we talk about energy, we first need to crack the AI agenda. What does this mean? The data centers, the chips, the models. Where do we stand with world models that we can power and bring into our physical world? So I think these are the big challenges I think we need to answer and solve first and become faster in answering them. And then we come to the second order effect, and that is energy. And now if we talk energy and AI, for me, one of the most interesting analysis is actually if we look at the P&L or some of the KPIs of OpenAI. And it clearly gets obvious that scaling of intelligence is ultimately scaling of power demand. And the left-hand chart, it nearly looks like it was created in a way on like artificially, but this is the data. Their compute rose in exactly the same amount as their revenues did. So intelligence is clearly, with the current technologies that we're using, scaling with power. And what will this ultimately mean? You see this on the right-hand side. This is the power demand. It's an estimate. Take it as a range. We didn't put ranges on. Our numbers, also the way we discuss it with OpenAI, we come up that it is likely by 2030 around 16 gigawatts that are needed for Europe. Just to put that into context, a city like Munich in a year consumes 1 gigawatt. For me, it was a bit helpful to put gigawatts into context. But what does this mean now, the 16 gigawatts that we need? Do we actually have the supply for that demand that is coming? And we don't yet have the announced capacities that are coming to market. You see here, currently we stand of a demand of 6 versus 3 gigawatts, and the outlook is even worse when we look at it. The 16 are not closely covered from the supply that we currently see. So we have a challenge actually on building up the supply, but there are other couple of challenges which we'll discuss in a minute, I guess, on the panel, and that is if we look overall in 2030, around 5% of the energy that we need in Europe and consume in Europe will be needed for data centers. Of the growth in energy demand, around 10% of the growth of energy demand will come from data centers in Europe. So it is a serious number that we're looking at. Can we build this? I'm sure we will discuss this in a minute, and our view is that for sure this is possible, but there are a couple of preconditions that need to be met. And one of them, as always in these technological discussions, is clearly speed. If we look at Germany, these are the German numbers. New grid connections take 7 to 10 years in key markets. One of the really critical issues that we see, that we are actually not able of powering these data centers fast enough. And the second one is, it has something to do with the power mix that we have in the countries, with the add-on of renewables in these countries. There is a certain variability or volatility in the power production, and clearly you need certain methods in order to stabilize this, and this will take quite a lot of investments. And I would leave these 3 points then also for the discussion now in the group. What are the 3 things that we believe that really need to change in order to have enough energy, enough power at the right places in order to power the AI revolution in Europe? First one is, it's about the strategic siting. And it's becoming already clear that there might be 4 or 5 locations in Europe where the power demand should be located. The second thing is what I talked about before. It's actually bringing power to these data centers and connecting with the grid. Then we need quite a lot of targeted investments to connect the grids. And the third thing is really everything about making sure that this fluctuating energy creation that we have in the markets, that this can be balanced out, and that we have more innovation and more investment as well in balancing out the load that we see on the energy system. So in a nutshell, our view when we look at this, there is enough energy actually in the system. Obviously, data centers will take a serious chunk, 5% of the total amount by 2030, 10% of the growth of the power need in Europe. But the most important thing is actually connecting, making sure that we make these grid connections fast in the right strategic places. If this simple recipe would hold, we are confident that there is enough energy at the right spots to power the AI revolution in Europe. That's our perspective, but very curious now to discuss it with my colleagues. Thank you.
May I kindly ask you on stage, Charles Meyers and Birgitte Ringstad Vartdal. Thank you. Thank you, Michael, for pointing a lot of points out that we will debate in a second. With us is here on the panel Birgitte Ringstad Vartdal, the CEO and President of Statkraft. And Statkraft is Europe's largest producer of renewable energy and has significant hydropower, wind and solar assets across the continent, just to name a few things of your portfolio, but we are happy to have you. Thank you very much, Birgitte. And last but not least, we have Charles with us, Charles Meyers. He's the executive chairman of the board of directors of Equinix. And we know Equinix, but maybe some of us don't know Equinix. It's the largest global data center and provider for enterprise networks and cloud computing. Thank you very much for making time. So, Charles, of course, we are debating about the race of artificial intelligence. From your perspective, where do we stand? Where does Europe stand in this race of AI? You have a global network, you work globally. Give us a glimpse, a zoom. Where do you see Europe?
Well, we are, just to give a little more context on Equinix, you talked about us, we've been in this business for a long time, founded about 27 years ago on a founding principle that somebody needed to create a platform that would allow people to have an equitable, neutral internet exchange, and thus the name Equinix. That vision of having somewhere to house and interconnect the most important digital assets in the world has turned into a very big business. And so we now we operate 270 data centers across 77 markets in 36 countries, and so definitely have a very wide lens from which to answer that question. We do about a third of our business in Europe, which is about the same size roughly as our US business. So we're exceptionally global in our footprint. And what I would say is it's been interesting because I was on a sort of a roundtable discussion over lunch, and the question was posed of how Europe can overcome the challenges and seize the opportunities, and honestly, those questions are being asked in every industrialized economy around the world. And so I don't think that it's unique here. Every market has unique challenges, but I think that there are a number of strengths from which to build here in Europe. And the reality is Europe is still one of the most attractive end user markets in the world, period. And so investment will find its way to Europe. Now, can we collectively collaborate to reduce the friction associated with that and speed the time to market and therefore maximize the opportunity and improve the timing of that opportunity? Absolutely. Much work to be done there, and I'm sure we'll talk about many of those aspects.
Charles, since when are you actually actively participating at a Munich Security Conference? Because talking about data center is one thing, talking about energy security and in the security context is another thing.
Yeah.
Are you here quite often for quite some years?
This is our first time at the MSC.
So it's shifting a discussion, right?
Yeah, I mean, but I will say that this has been, the energy has been central to the conversation for the last several years, for sure. I would say even our thinking on how we approach siting of locations is increasingly power first. That is the primary sort of vector on which sites are evaluated. But it is a very, very topical thing to be focused on, for sure.
Great to have you. Thank you.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Birgitte, turning, of course, to your work and, of course, to your portfolio when we look into the rapid growth that we need when it comes to the electricity demand for data center, for artificial intelligence infrastructure. So give us a glimpse, how do you see Statkraft's portfolio and also the investment strategy involved in that to ensure that also renewable energies and that renewable generation can scale fast enough to power all these data centers that we are needing?
Thanks for being here, and I really look forward to the discussion. Just a few words on Statkraft first. So our heritage is from Norway, where we have a significant hydropower fleet. So we have 25% of Europe's reservoir capacity, meaning we have some of the flexibility that is needed in this system. But we also have solar, wind, batteries, a technical thing called grid stabilizers across Europe, which is really balancing this portfolio. But stepping back from sort of data centers on its own, the whole electricity and energy system is going through a change. And the growth that is expected and needed in electricity is far beyond data centers. Currently, sort of data centers is what we are talking about, but a few years ago it was hydrogen. But we need to electrify transport, we need to electrify industry. So we expect a significant growth in the electricity system in itself, replacing fossil fuel as a start. Data centers is, of course, a significant part of that, but it's only like a fifth or a tenth, as you said, depending on which numbers you use, of the growth. The difference, though, is the speed. I think the speed you can build and implement a data center versus the speed you can electrify, for instance. And that pushes, of course, us and others to be faster, constructing faster, connecting to the grid faster. But then I think also, you haven't come to Norway yet, but I can offer cold weather. I think that's good for data centers. Low power prices.
We are actually in the business game already. Love that. Well played.
Also in Ireland, for instance, we do contracts with Microsoft. And they look for new power, so they want to see new construction of wind and solar. The fact that data centers are consuming power across day and night is actually positive because it can absorb more of the renewable power during the day, so you avoid these negative prices. So we see a lot of positive elements, actually, that data center bring into the system.
Charles, would you like to comment on that?
I
about
would.
the Norwegian
I mean,
way
I think that
of
dynamic is very true. While, again, we are just a piece of the bigger puzzle, we fully recognize that. I think that because data centers are growing at the rate that they are, and because we have a very attractive base load, and because we have the financial wherewithal, I think, as a sector, broadly speaking, to step in and make the level of commitments on which significant energy investment, which benefits all, can be underwritten. And I think that is a really important thing for people to understand. And by the way, this story is, that we have these same discussions, whether it's in the U.S. Or Europe or other parts of the world. I think there is a increasing appreciation for that, and it's not a trivial matter by any means. But I think that there is a movement for, because we have had issues in terms of the way it used to work is we'd say, we need this much energy, and the energy provider would say, okay, and sometimes that would not materialize. And the costs of that, would be borne by the system at large and by end users. I think that's not a palatable scenario, right? And that is one that obviously, citizens and governments are very sensitive to that in terms of saying, hey, we already are feeling the pain of higher energy prices, et cetera. We can't have that. And so I think that by stepping up to a willingness to commit to their fair share of the costs and to be able to underwrite investments in a really sound way is a really important part of this equation.
Michael, turning to you, of course, with the look into the data set you just presented. So what is crucial to understand the question of AI for energy or energy for AI? What is still a blind spot that you see? Because maybe we understand AI sometimes in different ways that are not progressively towards what we need.
Yeah, I think at the beginning, I tried to be a bit pointed in a way that, first of all, we need to solve, in a way, our view and our strategy on AI and the AI adoption and the AI push in Europe. I mean, if you look at it from all elements of the tech stack, you could say that from a sovereignty point of view, Europe is not there, right? I mean, you could say, if you start from the top, on the data side, we don't have the data arrangement to feed the models. If you go down to the model layer, these are mainly US or some Chinese, and then you go down to the chip layer. So I think having a perspective on how we create more sovereignty on that stack layer, I think is clearly a top priority. But then not thinking through the implications on energy, obviously, doesn't work for the overall system. So I think once you have clarity on the I'm coming back on the high-tech strategy for a country, on the high-tech strategy of a region, and I think we probably need to think it more European than country-wise. Where are the respective sites? What type of models will we have? Where will the chips be produced? Once you have that picture more on a European level, then I think it's also more straightforward to think through, okay, where do we need to have energy on what of these strategic sites, and how can we connect these data centers, for example, more quicker. And I tried to show it on this page. Having time frames of 7+ years in order to get permits, in order to connect, is in this world where basically models get an update every 4 weeks. I think it's just unacceptable.
But to see this puzzle and to plan this puzzle, who do you see then in responsibility for that?
It's not one single player, and I think that's the interesting thing in my view when you look at the high-tech agenda. I think it's a combination of the government, for sure, of the private sector. I think in all these deep tech topics, academia needs to come in as well. So I think it's really it's a mixture of parties, and for me the most important thing is getting a perspective on the strategic vision. Where do we want to be on the high-tech agenda in Europe and in the countries? And I believe that there's still a lack on what type of AI models do we want to have.
But on which side? Again, on the leader side, on the government side, or on the citizen side? Because in the end, we are all affected by the use of AI in certain ways.
Some companies have a clear perspective, or starting to have a clear perspective what AI means to them, but I'm looking at more from a critical infrastructure point of view, and I think we don't have that defined yet. What is the critical infrastructure for Europe, and what does critical infrastructure mean in the context of AI, in the context of life sciences? And I think that is an effort that hits both the public sector and the private sector, and I think that's where I believe we need some clarity.
Absolutely. Charles, would you like to comment on that?
I think that system-level view is super important, because I think that there is a bit of hysteria and myopia around certain elements of the problem or the opportunity that don't reflect a deeper and more nuanced understanding of how the entire system works together. And for example, I think that right now, what you hear a lot about in the media and other places is around the creation, or the building of multi-gigawatt AI factories with huge power demands. Those things, and typically being used for the training of large language models, et cetera, those are a part of the puzzle, but only an important part, but only a part of the puzzle. And I think that it's important to think about strategic siting for those locations. And as a region, Europe has an interesting opportunity and challenge in that I think they can bring relative strengths of member states to the table in ways that are compelling. Yet the ability to coordinate that is challenging. Right, and we've heard some of that, and so I think overcoming some of that and finding a common ground at a region level is going to be an important element of the mix. But that system level understanding, because I will tell you that there is also a lot of data center investment that needs to be made in proximity to major metros. In fact, a significant portion, perhaps the majority. And so as you look at policy application, for example, sort of thinking about rural zones is not adequate to solve the problem. And in fact, if it's not solved end to end, you're going to end up. I've been using an analogy a bit in using sort of automotive, or more specifically electric automotive EVs, to say, you can build a plant, but if you can't deliver the cars to the end user, energize them, service and support them, all the investment that went into building them is lost, right? In the same way, we can build, design, develop, and train large language models, But that only represents potential value. That value is only realized when those models are deployed into the market in proximity to users and in proximity to other data sources. And that's where, so you have to think through that full end-to-end sort of situation.
Birgitte, and that brings me perfectly, of course, to the use of AI tools, of digital tools, when it comes to optimizing the grid, right? So when we use all that we are currently developing, clean tech, all these, a lot of innovation thoughts, how do we, or how will you optimize then the grid operations, how to balance this renewable generation, and of course, how do you include AI in the grid management as to make it smarter, to make it more affordable, and of course to more sustainable.
Maybe just I'll answer that, but just follow up on some of the comments. I think there is a security element to this as well. So we, of course, our data, we want to have control of those data.
Sure, absolutely.
And that's an important part of the strategy around AI, is really also to control the data. And for us as a provider of energy is a critical infrastructure, that's an additional element. And then to your question, we don't optimize the grid as such. We are generating the power, but still we see that there are significant opportunities in optimizing the grid. Because when you calculate sort of how much power you can go through the grid at any given time, you put in buffers to be secure in order to avoid that you get a blackout and your data center can't operate. But if you use AI and big data, you can kind of reduce those buffers, and then you can utilize the grid more. So you can get, without generating more power, you can kind of optimize the grid more efficiently across. And then for us as a producer, and particularly with weather, in a weather-based system, so we are depending on water, we are depending on the sun and the wind. So we really use AI and data to optimize our weather forecasting, to estimate how much power we will generate. Then when we bid this into the system, we reduce the deviation sort of in our generation. And that also optimizes the grid. It reduces the cost of the system because we are more exact in how we manage it. So that's sort of a few examples where we use AI in sort of optimizing the generation.
And is that also common ground, or is that rather the exception when you're listening to this example, Michael? What can you tell us about it, using the AI as a smart tool for the system?
I don't think at all that it's the exception. I think it's becoming market standard. I think the question is, as I guess we see across all of industries, I mean, every company has started to adopt it. And the question is now, where do you start it? Some still make the mistake that you start in a division, on a sub-process, on a small topic. I think the ones where the leaders that we see in the market in adopting AI is where the CEO has a clear perspective and runs it basically from the top in the organization. I think that's point one. And I think gone are a bit like the use cases where you say, hey, we experiment here and we experiment there. So I think 26 will be the year where it's a clear CEO agenda topic. It's clearly coming from the top, and I think it's not show me the experiment or the pilot, but show me the impact on the P&L. I think that's where we are in 26, and I guess that's why AI needs to be part in all of these discussions because of the efficiency potential that we see, and the reason why 26 I think is such a breaking point is, and coming back to what I said before, is with the speed that we see in permitting versus the speed how the technology is evolving. I mean, in this room, probably if you would have asked 8 weeks ago which models are the winners at the moment, I guess we would have probably a low number would have said maybe Google is winning the race, and then comes the next update, and all of a sudden you see the performance of the models where everything is shaking up. So I think we're dealing with a speed of change in the quality of the models that I think we haven't seen, probably in our lifetime on impact on businesses. And hence, I think it can only be the CEO of a business owning that topic.
Would you agree, Birgitte, that it's really a CEO mindset and to really bring it forward and in the end of being successful as well?
Yeah, I very much agree to it, and I brought all my top 100 leaders. We had a gathering, and I had them all to sort of do the training and use it, because I think you also have to see the opportunities. I used to do like algorithms and mathematics, so I can sort of envisage some of the opportunities, but you really have to show people what it is, because it gets a bit abstract for people, and you have to demonstrate it. But I wanted to also add, we talked about generation and we talked about grid. And then there's another piece in the puzzle, and that's demand. And in the past, in the electricity system, it's been so that the production has just gone up and down whenever the demand has been needed. And the production has done all the adjustments and sort of accepting the demand. With a system now with more renewables, more variability in the system, we have to turn this a bit around. And that's also where AI can help, because you can optimize, the easy example is charging your car. And you can have like support to optimize when are you charging the car. And then instead of having the supply side to adjust, you can get the demand side to adjust. And as we discussed, I would be surprised if AI can't optimize the AI compute as well.
So, absolutely. It can and it is. Yeah. Two comments. One, I absolutely agree with Michael in that, in fact, we reported our results, or a public company reported our results yesterday, the day before, and 60% of our bookings, which were up like 42% year over year, were from AI. Or AI related, and a lot of that is not on the supply side necessarily of AI, meaning service providers building out infrastructure to deliver services, but on the enterprise side of people who are now beginning to see value realization from AI, and that's super important. And so I do think that that time is here. And on this AI for energy side of things, I would say I absolutely agree. We were having a discussion, and I'll give you this is one that I think is nuanced in terms of how we could get it wrong versus maybe doing it in a sophisticated tech-forward way, and that's on the topic of curtailment, which is I think there is an opportunity. In fact, there's one of the many innovative companies that are here this week, Emerald AI, that is sort of developing AI for specifically that purpose in terms of taking a very sophisticated AI-driven approach that's fully integrated with the delivery system to say, okay, how can we curtail sort of with precision, surgically? And that approach, I think, is very viable, but will need some time, versus sort of blunt force regulation of curtailment when you just switch a data center off. Not great for our customers, and really just not acceptable, and I think has a huge degree of unintended consequences if you take that sort of more blunt force approach.
I'd like to tackle a little bit more of your headaches, maybe, that you have, relocating or locating data centers all over the world. Of course, with the European and maybe also with the German lens when we look into the Frankfurt room. So permitting processes and, of course, energy prices come to my mind. Do you have some more headaches and migraines about it?
Let me tackle the energy prices. Look, I do think there is a portion. This is why it's so important to have that system view, in that I think we can effectively underwrite returns on investment at current energy prices. Do we all want them to go down? Yes. Are there subsets of the demand set that are going to be more sensitive to price? Yes, absolutely. And that can locate in different places? Yes. But that's why you have to understand the underlying workloads and where they go. And so we look at and segment the market by workload, ranging ranging from things that are very geo-independent, meaning they can go anywhere, and to things that are very geo-specific, meaning they have to be in proximity to certain other resources, et cetera. We tend to operate much more on that side of things, and in proximity to metros, and that's why sort of the policy has to take all those things into account. And so that, that's one element that the pricing is in and of itself a nuanced thing, but I think a lot of the investment can be underwritten even at current prices, recognizing that we all have to work together to bring them down.
This is not a sign to stop. It's just a sign to recalibrate.
Okay.
Sure, sorry, we're picking up again.
Permitting definitely a very big problem. Right? I mean, you're absolutely right, Mike. It is simply not workable, right?
Yeah.
We cannot have that. And I believe, based on what I've heard on this stage, there is common ground that says must be fixed. And oh, by the way, common ground at a region and an EU level, not just at a country level, right? And so this is one where I think the world is waiting to say, okay, well then can you get the region, or can you get the EU to actually act in concert in a way that really starts to make progress against that issue. And I think it would be a really big thing if that can happen.
What's your take on the claim of made in Europe? Also, of course, it applies to the product that you're selling, data centers made in Europe, that the data are stored in Europe, bringing everything again into the borders of Europe. So, of course, you are attached to that topic.
Sure.
But how do you follow that debate? And, of course, there's different definitions because it's one sentence, but so many different definitions. How would you actually define made in Europe from a data center perspective?
Well, what I would say is that the sovereignty, which is used kind of interchangeably with self-reliance, right? When I hear sovereignty, generally I'm thinking about it more about data sovereignty and building sovereign cloud implementations, for example, or, and our infrastructure, because we provide baseline technical infrastructure, space, power, interconnection to people on which they build private infrastructure and then interconnect it to cloud. We are kind of sovereign by design, and we support and enable the construction and development and management of sovereign infrastructure. And we think that is a very real thing. We think there's a lot of clear motivations from that, for a privacy standpoint. And so on the data sovereignty side, all systems go. I think on the sovereignty of made in Europe, which is more of, around, understandably, by the way, given the current geopolitical context, including that in my own country, is one that is more complicated and more nuanced, in that I think you have to both understand that, and it would be foolish, I think, like Carney's comments at Davos, et cetera, it would be foolish not to look at the grand context and say, and what's happened here, for example, given the exposure to Russian gas and those kind of things, and say self-reliance is a very real topic, and we must consider it, right? And so but at the same time, a movement towards deep protectionism that results in a lack of choice for the end customer to select market, sort of best-in-class services and assemble them in ways that achieve the outcomes desired. I think there's got to be a middle ground there to meet.
Birgitte, do you join in Charles' explanations when it comes to this title of Made in Europe? Of course, when we debate energy security or within the framework of Made in Europe, also combining it with the topic that we're debating here of AI?
Yes, so there are sort of a few aspects to it. Of course, when it comes to energy and electricity, the dependence that Europe have had on Russian gas, of course, and driving prices up in the past, has shown also the dependency in that market. Building out our own generation locally, whether it's wind, solar, hydro for the ones that are lucky that have that, is really critical also in a security aspect.
Especially for the Nordics as well, right?
Also for all of us. For the Nordics, for all of us. And over time, this will also help affordability, and a topic that is not sort of on top of the agenda this year, but still as important. It will support climate and reduce climate emissions. The dilemma, of course, there are some of the dilemmas in this as well, is that we are moving from being dependent on importing fossil fuel to being dependent currently in many renewable technologies on importing the materials, the supplies from China. And like on solar panels, for instance, China is more or less the sole supplier. And the benefit for Europe is, of course, that we are able to import low-cost solar panels, technically good panels. It enables a cheap build-out. But over time, it kind of shifts a dependency from fossil fuel to a dependency on the import. And therefore, it's really important for Europe to look at least building up some capacity to sort of have a balance. But I don't think we will come to the stage where we will not have that dependency.
Oh, talking about, again, the keyword of dependencies, Michael, being dependency-free in the topic of AI, what would you recommend? Because we don't want to get back into the trap of new dependencies in any way, of the news cycles and circles. Maybe we can learn from the past, right?
We can certainly learn from the errors of the past, I guess, and I think the solar era is probably the biggest lesson learned that we can look at. I mean, in a nutshell, if you look at what has happened in the solar game, is the difference between sort of subsidizing demand versus subsidizing supply. And we in Europe or in Germany, we went for subsidizing demand, and the Chinese went for subsidizing supply, and it creates completely different dynamics in the market, different prices, different scale curves. At the end of the day, Germany didn't run down the scale curve because the supply was not nimble and fast scaling enough, and the Chinese went down the scale curve, and hence you lost a 40% market share to 0 in 10 years. So I think that's a clear lesson how certain instruments can have an impact on technological sectors. When it comes to sovereignty, for me, sovereignty per se is not the goal. At the end of the day, you only can be sovereign, in my view, if you have technological leadership. And I think, again, we need to talk again about how can we achieve in the critical sectors, in the critical parts of supply chains of our industries, leadership.
Do we talk that in the wrong order? Because we talk about so many things. So what would be the right order? Is it technology?
In my world, everything starts. It needs to start with what is the most decisive input in the economic cycle. And in my view, it will be technology going forward. And then how you master and control and have really competitive technologies. And hence, I think coming back to what I said at the intro. Every country, every region needs to have a clear perspective. What will be the crucial technologies, and what role in these technologies do you want to play in order to achieve some sort of leadership? Because if you don't have this leadership, sovereignty is not possible.
Wonderful. What do we need to learn? You mentioned it earlier, innovation for flexibility in demand and supply. And of course, I'd like to come in with that again when we talk about the innovational part, which is also part of your presentation earlier, one of the 3 bullet points. I just want to tackle that so that we are actually getting the loop back again to your presentation. So I start with the 3rd one. You mentioned innovation for flexibility in demand and supply as a to-do, so to say, as I understood it. But
I think you've explained it perfectly before, but I think this is your core business at the end of the day. I guess one of your main KPIs is in a way that you take the swings out of the generation and make sure that you're a reliable partner to the companies that you supply. And I guess within there is going to be a massive upside that we will have machines supporting humans in order to manage this system. And I think we're only at the starting point that where AI is taking over this whole balancing. But it will also require that on the demand side we have a lot more digitization in a way, so that we have the more smart applications, so that the system can communicate with each other. So it's not just on the actual generation side; it's also the demand side that needs to speak to each other. Again, we're always coming back to the system thinking, and that's where the investments will need to go in.
And of course, we've spoken a lot about the European system and the European example. Can you give us a glimpse of how well Germany is doing? Because of course we are based here. So where do you see the AI race in the German context? With all the headaches, of course, that you mentioned, with all the to-dos.
I mean, this is.
Or is it all
if we
connected?
look at it overall, I think we are. When we look at the adoption of AI in businesses, we always think about it as there are two races in AI. The first race is how strong you are in technology, and the second race is how strong you are in applying the technology. The first race, we're not good. At least, again, the last race, I always look at it, we lost the LLM race, but there will be a physical world, there will be world model race where the clock will be on zero, and I think that one we can win. But we are doing pretty well on the adoption race. And I think that is one we should focus on, that the companies are really deploying AI, bringing AI into the workforce, reimagining workflows. And I think if you compare the US with Europe on that dimension, we're on par.
Interesting. Charles, would you agree? I mean, you had a global perspective.
Somebody at the lunch I was at today sort of offered a point of view, and there was a bit of sort of weeping and gnashing of the teeth around sort of all the things, the challenges, but there was an expression of optimism around Germany in particular's sort of demonstrated expertise in managing and dealing with industrial complexity. And I think that I do think that is a strength from which to build. And this is an example of that, which says, okay, how can we therefore use inputs, including technology, to unlock value in complex systems? And so I think that, and this is a very diverse industrial economy, and one that I think that is something that can be built. The other thing I would offer is that I think there is innovation to be had. Well, AI is one very highly focused on area of innovation now, but there is basic science innovation as well, and there is a lot of innovation in basic science that I think is going to be required, and we saw some of that this week. And the discussions that have been on stage here, things like next generation, fourth generation nuclear, et cetera, and fusion, and all of these things that are saying, hey, well, where are the investments being made there? And that is something that I think there is an appetite and a mindset and a philosophy to continue to invest in, is something that I think is critically important. Because if you don't like where you are, velocity is your friend. And the reason being that because if you can only make small deviations in your sort of position or your angle of attack, if you're not moving very fast, then it will not create big deltas. No. If things are moving very quickly, you all of a sudden separate much faster. And so I think using that sort of analogy, we are in a very rapidly moving environment. And you look at these things and people are forecasting out to 2035 and 40. Forget it. They aren't even going to be close to right. And so can interventions and scalable technologies, just think about it, in storage, in generation, in optimization, can those dramatically change those forecasts? They can and they will.
We meet again in 1 year and you bring the full list. That's a deal. So, and with that, I open up the floor to your questions because it's such a hot topic. I want to use the opportunity to also have your questions. I see one here. How many else do I have? One here, the gentleman. Microphone is coming. The happy number is at least 3, so 2 more hands going up. That's no pressure, but I want to have a little bit of involvement here at the afternoon.
Poke me in the face.
Are you okay?
Yep.
Sorry, I saw your face. And
coming in a bit quickly.
Tell us, what keeps you busy?
I used to work for a growth, what you might call a hyperscaler, but we haven't talked about bubbles yet. There's a lot of hype in hyperscaling.
Yeah.
How do we get this right?
Yeah. I mean, the bubble question is one we get a lot, right? In terms of, Here's what I would say. I think the underlying demand forces are extremely sustainable. So I think there's good reason to be making the investment in any capital-intense industries as they go through sort of accelerated demand cycles. Do they see circumstances where there are kind of bubblish dynamics? I think so, but I don't see that as something. It's very different than, say, how people thought about the sort of internet bubble or the dot-com bubble or of that time. These are positional assets that I think have long-term value. Will there be situations where people do not? I think there is not sufficient discipline in underwriting necessarily right now, and it's something we are very thoughtful about. But I also think that these are assets that will have long-term value and that they will have a underlying demand signal for over time. I come from an infrastructure background, and I was with a US-based company called Level 3 Communications. And they were convinced that we had built more fiber than would ever be used in the history of man, that turns out not to be true. So when you have valuable assets, they will be consumed. There might be some breakage along the way, but I'm convinced in the underlying demand signal.
Michael, what is your observation on the bubble debate and on the bubble discussion? Is it something that will break down, or do you think it has long-term value, of course?
For me, the question is always, what bubble are we talking about? I mean, there's first of all, for sure, you could argue there's a valuation bubble, but I think I would be actually more in your camp on the physical side. I think we see it on the data. I mean, that we still, if the demand models are if they are directionally right, we still have too little supply. At least in Europe. So I think on that side, I wouldn't yet speak of a bubble, at least from a European perspective when we look at the data. For sure, market-wise, I mean, we just see this unfolding at the moment, that there is that the valuations are not holding up.
It is hard to make sense of some of the valuations, but I will say that on your chart earlier, I can assure you that that linear scaling between revenue and infrastructure is not the long-term objective. And I think you will see that a multiple. It will turn into a multiple.
I'm sure this is also a level of frustrations for some investors when they look at this chart.
Right, yes. Exactly. That's not what they underwrote, I'm sure.
More questions from your side. I'm very curious, which blind spots do you see? What headaches do you have in that topic? You are all, here we go. Yes, you're all experts in the field as well, so I'm sure.
I can stand up one second.
Michael.
Michael, do you think that it's enough of a lead to be the fastest in employing the technology for Europe, or do we have to have more than that, probably?
Sorry, I didn't get the question.
Yeah.
Can you Sorry, can you
So basically, I think the question is speed of adoption sufficient for Europe to stay competitive? And I absolutely disagree with this. I think it's a survival strategy at the moment. It's about coping in a way that in this technological phase where the companies and the regions are, I think it's basically staying competitive, staying efficient. You need to deploy as fast as possible the technology. But I think I'm coming back, I think from a country point of view and ultimately from an industry point of view within the countries, you need to develop the next level of high-tech strategy, and you need to think through where do we want to be in 5 years and what models do we need to have in the country, in the region. I think it's all about critical infrastructure. How do we define it, and what needs to be in Europe, at what place, in which country? Yeah. I think that is is absolutely critical for the future sovereignty and competitiveness. So for the time being, it's all about adoption. Looking forward, it's about creating true competitiveness in new technology.
Yeah, and I would add an offer that I think actually. I think that's a good mindset, and we all benefit if you take a true global lens from markets that are deep and wide, right? In other words, I think having a viable, sort of range of options in things is critically important, right? And so being able to have a robust competitive dynamic across core technologies is good for everybody.
And I think where it's failed in some other technologies that you can maybe call a bubble is if we are not able to think through the whole value chain. So it doesn't help to kind of solve the piece up here if we forget to solve everything on the way, and thinking strategically on the whole infrastructure up to sort of the competence and the applications.
But do you think that's happening, the strategic thinking along the complete value chain and not just on the result? Do you think there's a change also in the industry?
Well, in the AI industry, I'm not the expert, but I still think that we need to lift the debate. It comes to electricity as a starting point, and it comes to production and all the steps on the way. And if we don't see and talk about the opportunities that we can get and the importance of positioning ourselves, we will also lose out on the debate for the basis of this. And you get a debate on, do we want more power or not, for instance. That's the wrong debate if we want to be successful in AI.
Yes.
Beautiful. I have a look around. I have one more question, at least, of course. Here we go. In the end, and then I go back to your part here, keeping everybody engaged. I know it's a long day at the MSC, but here we are. Tell us, what keeps you busy and what's your question?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm Armin Reinhardt of Proxima Fusion. We are competing actually very actively with the US and with China to build the first power plant and build up a fusion industry and get the world market share in this. So we are excited in doing this, but from a European perspective, it seems a lot more challenging to construct the whole supply chain at the same time. So you were talking about this, and also connecting it to AI. US companies are already, AI and fusion companies are teaming up. Are there special tools that you can refer to how we can accelerate the process in Europe, building the supply chain and also connecting it stronger to these AI build-ups that we're maybe not doing yet?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I have any silver bullets there other than to say, I mean, I do think that you have to, it really is helpful to look at that obviously on a full EU basis, because you can bring the respective strengths of each of the member states to that, to that puzzle. But that's complicated, as we've seen, right? And so, but I think it's also just important to maintain a global lens, even as you build a more regional, supply chain. But there's that is a I'm not sure I have any advice on exactly how to solve that. We have some, again, the scale and the less fragmented nature of the U.S. market is an advantage, and so that's and so trying to simulate that as best as possible within the realities is the best available option, I think.
Michael, do you have a silver bullet, or Birgitte, when we talk about the...
For sure, no silver bullet. I mean, I can only look at from all the scaling examples that we look at, because for us, this is one of the most crucial topic at the moment for the region's competitiveness. How can these amazing scale-ups like Proxima, how can you faster accelerate? I firmly believe that it's in this topic of demand-led innovation, and ultimately, I think it's this cooperation between the established companies and yourselves. We start to see the dynamic, I think, in the defense tech industry incredibly fast now, where you have offtake agreements, where you have early demand agreements. Probably for you, it will be crucial in the supply chain that you have strong agreements with established players. I firmly believe that this will unlock also the capital side of things, because once you can show to your investors, or ultimately also to the banks, look, we have these partners, we have these demand agreements, then I think you will also get non-dilutive capital on the debt side. I think this we haven't fully explored and utilized, this new cooperation that we need between scale-ups and corporates.
There is plenty of capital for people who are solving a burning problem that is real, and there's no shortage of capital to fuel that.
Birgitte, just a keyword, also taking up on what was just mentioned, and also in the terms of cooperation, really being in that partnership. Again, what would you say? How would you answer that question? And also, of course, what's your take?
No, I really think we also need to raise the sense of urgency. So we're talking about why does it take so long? What's the dilemmas? And these are processes that we have designed ourselves. For instance, connecting to the grid. One is construction, but it's a long process before that in order to get all the permitting in place, and that would be needed also for fusion, and kind of tying this all together and seeing that the race is now, it's not in 7 years from now. So how do we get that push? So maybe we put AI into the permitting processes.
Yeah. Well, and I think I think that sort of that sense of urgency in the mindset, there is a,
But we have that now, right?
Yeah, I mean, but I think it has to be one that is less of a, I think there is still a lingering sort of that AI and some of its, accoutrements are a burden to be avoided or overcome. I think the mindset needs to shift to an opportunity that absolutely must be seized. Because I would tell you that I think digital transformation, and particularly the magnifier being placed on that by AI, is quite arguably the most, the largest contributor to economic and social progress that our world has ever seen. And so I think an ability to, and an urgency to respond to that, because whether you're an individual, a company, a nation state, a sector, a nation state, a society, your ability to survive and thrive over time is going to be increasingly tied to your ability to unlock those forces.
So give me the last round here. Thank you very much for all your questions. I hope I haven't overseen anyone, right? Just give me a heads up. Otherwise, I'll do a wrap up with you. As it is an AI race, bring up the speed. So I don't give you 5 years, I give you until the end of 2026 to bring Europe forward. What's the top priority? To be at the forefront of this global European AI race at the end of 2026. The latest when we see each other again for the MSC 2027, but that's, December 2026, that's the deadline. So Michael, what is on the priority?
So if you have 6 or 9 months' time, and it needs to be super operational, I think where we're doing not a good job at all is informing the public. I mean, we haven't really talked about the public as an important stakeholder in all of this. I think we need to do a better job is, why do we need AI? Why do we need these data centers? And convincing people, okay, if we need a data center, there might be a gas plant sitting next to it, and we need to accept it because it's important for the sovereignty and the competitiveness of this country. I think we need to do a lot better job in explaining to the people that this is not about building data centers. This is about creating the future competitiveness of the country.
I love that, really getting out also of our bubble talks and about these scientific discussions. Wonderful, thank you, Mike. What would be your tip for the race?
Absolutely agree with that first one. It's a mindset shift and an ability to create enthusiasm and energy about a brighter future for all of us, and that's one. I think it does demand tactical progress, demonstrable progress on hard issues. And so things like if we can make real progress on permitting. If we can, I think we have to have a commitment and a level of investment to add capacity to, from an energy perspective to the system, and be able to, apply that in ways that are really thoughtful. And I think that is going to be lean on technology and market forces where possible. Not that regulation isn't going to be required to some degree, but I think those are very blunt instruments. And so I think making progress on sort of using market forces to your advantage is going to be key.
Birgitte, I'm going to tweak the question a little bit because I'm not talking about the general AI race, but what is your recommendation to leaders and to CEOs to win the AI race for their companies?
Well, it was actually the same answer that I would give to your previous question. It's really to work on the competence and to train your colleagues, show the opportunities that are there, to really open the sort of perspectives and let people understand which opportunities that we can use. And I think that would also support sort of the general public seeing the opportunities that is in this.
Beautiful. Yeah. And with that, I thank you very much. Thank you to Birgitte Ringstad Vartdal, to Charles Meyers, and to Michael Brigl. Thank you very much for having this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you.
you. It's a pleasure to have you.